On today's Technobabble, naming, framing, and taming.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of Technobabble from the Trinity Digital Media Studios. I say that it's still a pretty small room, but that's okay. I've got a little bit more tech going on here. You can't see it behind the scenes, but I'm experimenting with a couple of things, trying to figure out a way to record the video live. Audio, not so hard. You know, I can use my iPhone or some sort of audio server to play tracks. That's no big deal, but switching is a little bit more tricky. So I'm going back and forth between Boinks.tv, which for recording seems to work fine. Ustream Director for live streaming seems to work fine. And CamTwist Studio, which seems to have the ability to do both, but I haven't been happy with the quality yet. So that's something maybe for a future show. Well, let's start out with this. Let's start out talking about naming. When it comes to naming your files, it can be kind of unwieldy, but there's a few tips that I've come across. Now, you'll notice in my show files that the names that I have start out with the three letters TNB, Technobabble. Makes sense. It also separates them on my hard drive, so I know which are Technobabble shows. Now, to give them unique identifiers, then I've put in the date. Now, you'll notice that the date looks a little bit different from maybe what you'll expect. That's because I've put the last two of the year first. I initially was putting in all four of the year, but it occurred to me that the tech in the future is going to be radically different, and they probably won't have hard drives and stuff. So in 100 years, they don't really need to know that it's 2011 versus 2111. They'll know just by looking at me that I'm one of those ancient geezers from the past recording in his spare room. Anyway, all that to say, so I've started out for this episode, it would be 110225. That's today's date. I'm recording this February 25th, 2011. And then the next thing that I put in is the episode number and then the show title. So once I do that, I have everything that I need to know about the show just by glancing at its name. So when I'm recording files for other purposes, I'll often use that date format followed by a brief description way of doing things, and I find that it's really helpful. It's just I can know immediately. First off, I don't go back to things that I did 3 years ago and think, oh, this is the thing I'm looking for, when it was clearly recorded 3 years ago or worked on or created or whatever. So also, when you put year first, by the way, in a computer, you can organize numerically, and all the 2011 files will be together, all the 2010 files, all the 2009, and so on, all the way back to, whenever you start. So that's also kind of helpful to have those in numeric order like that. Later, taming, but first, framing, right after this.
This is Phil Graves calling from our nation's capital, and you're listening to Tech No Babble.
So, one thing that I've noticed, and I see this a lot in novices, but I was actually doing a whole lot of photo editing yesterday. That's one of the little side things that I've picked up. And I was looking at hundreds of pictures, and one of my assignments was cropping them all so that they fit exactly where I wanted them to be. Well, with the latest version of iPhoto, when you crop, I set it up to automatically crop to 8x10. It also gave me a what looks like a tic-tac-toe board. Now, I've talked about this before, but it's been quite a while. That's what we call the rule of thirds. So on any screen, you can imagine that there's a tic-tac-toe board. And what you want to do is put the most important information at the places where those corners come together. Now, for a straight-on headshot like this, I might not do that. That would give me a shot that looked a little something like... sorry, I'm looking at a backwards version of myself. It's a little confusing. There, or like that. But... and for those of you that are listening to audio, that made no sense whatsoever. But imagine that I was placing myself within the rule of thirds. But for a straight-on shot, right on the golden line, which is about there, you'll notice that's where I put my eyes. Now, I've noticed that a lot of people, and I've actually seen this in camcorder documentation, they suggest that you place the person's head smack dab in the middle of the shot. So, for my shot here, that would look more like this, which is very annoying because you see all the stuff above me that's not all that important. I put it up there because I like it, but, I'm the most important thing in this shot. And I mean that in the most humble way. You're tuning in to watch this, not to see my... collection of odds and ends behind me. So that's just a couple of things on framing. You'll also notice that there are some odd shots from time to time where there's a bunch of headroom, where you see tons of stuff above the person's head. And if you look, usually that's about 2/3 of the shot. So they're still using the rule of thirds, but they're using the bottom third of the screen. Another thing that you see title bars and things that show up at the bottom third of the screen. We call those lower thirds, which are superimposed over the screen or super. There's a Dairy Queen commercial right now where there is the little silly mouth icon and a price shows up and he says, "Oh, a super, what can you do that I can't do?" Well, that's what he's talking about. Something that's superimposed is in broadcast called a super. Little inside baseball talk for that commercial. I was a little surprised they went that way, but sometimes when you know something, you forget that you know it and other people don't. Up next, Taming, right after this.
Music for Techno Babble is generously provided by Firefly. Visit their website, fireflyrock.com.
So when it comes to taming, you might notice that you've got a mass of spaghetti. Not on your plate, but around your tech booth, around everything that you have. So this is something that I've run into myself. I used to have a big bucket full of cables here that was an attempt to organize them, but they really weren't all that tame. So what I've created is a cable organization system. Now this cost me $5. Basically what I did is I took a 2x4 and a pretty substantial piece of dowel, and I took a hole saw and drilled a hole along the length of the, several holes actually, along the length of the 2x4, and then cut off about foot-long pieces of dowel and put them in there, screwed them into place, and then screwed that up on my wall. And as you'll see from the picture, I now have all my cables organized by what they do. And while it's not as great as it could be, it's remarkably better than it has been. So that's just something, if you've got a little piece of wall space and a bunch of cables, that's a good way to fix that. Let's say that you've got some cables that are used primarily just for one thing. When I used to work in local television, we had each camera had its own large cable. We were using triax cable, so it's a pretty thick cable. And so in order to organize that, we had the little hooks that you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever for hanging a hose on. And so at the end of the night, when you put your camera back up, you'd wind it up and put the cable back there on the hose hanger hook, and that would keep each of the camera's cables separate. When it comes to racks, cabling can easily become just unmanageable. People that know what they're doing can create beautiful cable layouts where everything's just organized so well that it's impressive. You can really tell an amateur installer from a professional based on how well they do their cables. So that's just a few things, and hopefully I'll get this cam twist or one of the other software switchers up and running. And then maybe we'll talk about it next time. But until then, go out and change eternity.